I departed from my home due to a sense of neglect from my family, and now my parents have suddenly decided they want me back to help take responsibility for my siblings. Out of the 5 of us, I am the youngest, with the next sibling being 7 years older than me. So when I say youngest, I mean it in a significant way. Growing up, I must admit I always felt invisible. My parents seemed to think that because I wasn't ill or struggling with mental health issues like my other siblings, I didn't need their attention. I don't mean to sound overly dramatic, but this was the reality I faced. The others were frequently in and out of therapy or hospitals, while I, the so-called glass child, was merely present in the background. Even if you could see me, you didn't pay much attention to me. For the most part, I was okay with that. I read extensively, played video games, and kept to myself since there wasn't really anyone else around to entertain me. I learned to amuse myself. I didn't have to take care of my siblings. Some people talk about sacrificing their childhoods to care for their brothers and sisters, but I wasn't in that position. I give credit where it's due because my parents managed everything, but I just slipped through the cracks. Unlike my brothers, I wasn't causing trouble or experiencing crises all the time. I didn't receive any help because I didn't need it. I don't believe my parents did this on purpose. The healthy child often becomes an afterthought when you have 4 kids who are constantly battling health issues. I became the quiet kid who didn't draw attention because my parents were too busy managing the others' medical appointments, school meetings, and hospital stays, not in a tragic sense, but rather in a pragmatic, we've got our hands full way. I was invisible. I wasn't entirely alone, though. Mia and Clara were my 2 closest friends when I was younger. We connected because their families were in similar situations. We bonded over the shared experience of feeling overlooked and excluded. They eventually became closer to me than my biological family ever was. After high school, we remained tight-knit, attended college together, graduated together, and eventually moved to a different state because we were inseparable. Using the fragments that our real families were unable to provide, we created our own small family. After I moved out, my parents and I didn't communicate much. We hadn't talked much when I was still living there, so it wasn't surprising. Occasionally, my mother would text me, primarily to ask about my job or how school was going. Even if our relationship was superficial, it was better than when I was a teenager and we hardly spoke. I didn't ask for much, nor did I expect much from them. During one of my mother's phone calls, the disconnect really struck me. We had never called each other, so it was unexpected. I could tell right away that something was wrong. About a year had passed since our last phone conversation when she called to inform me of the time and location of one of my sister's funerals. That was the extent of our communication. This time, she called to find out my Thanksgiving arrival time. I was taken aback. I hadn't even realized they were planning anything. We didn't have any significant family traditions. I think they attempted to celebrate Thanksgiving or Christmas maybe 3 times during my entire childhood. In my family, it simply didn't exist. I told her I had plans already. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't just drop everything and come over because I had plans to go skiing with Mia and Clara. Additionally, I would have had to purchase an airline ticket well in advance since I lived 2 states away. My mother, however, acted as if I was just being difficult. She began guilt-tripping me, claiming she would be alone because my dad was traveling 2 hours to visit my brother at the facility where he was staying. I understood how she felt, but she hardly communicated that to me and seemed to think I would just appear out of nowhere to cheer her up. She became angry and accused me of not caring about the family when I told her I couldn't come. After I reiterated that I already had plans, she hung up. I sat there feeling both angry and guilty. Suddenly, I was the bad person for not dropping everything to travel home for Thanksgiving, even though I hadn't heard from them in a long time. As I went over old texts to see if I had missed anything, I realized she expected me to comply and had thrown this at me at the last minute. Later that evening, I texted her to let her know that I would love to see her and Dad after the new year, but I couldn't make it because I had a ski trip scheduled for Christmas as well. I tried to be kind, but she didn't respond. A few days later, my mother's attempts to blame me for not returning reconsidered their choices and how they felt overwhelmed. I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. Distant didn't even begin to describe our relationship. They were only now realizing that I had been aloof throughout my life. Once again, I ignored the texts and focused on preparing for the ski trip. I must admit, I was as excited as Mia and Clara were. It seemed like the perfect way to escape all the family drama. For the first time in a long while, I didn't think about my parents. I didn't feel depressed or guilty, I simply felt liberated. Naturally, though, peace couldn't last forever. Just as I was starting to relax, my mother sent me another message in the middle of the journey. This time, she was not going to give up. She warned that they would have to start making decisions about the future without me, something I wouldn't enjoy if I didn't return home soon. At that moment, it became clear that there was more at stake than just Christmas. Perhaps it had to do with the house or one of my brothers. I had no idea why they were pushing so hard, but suddenly it became evident that they wanted me back for a more significant reason than simply having me around for the holidays. That realization hit me like a kick to the gut. I had always assumed they were just being needy or lonely, it was never about me. What they could gain from me was their main concern. I was done. I thought everything would settle down after my parents' attempts to guilt-trip me. I chose to ignore their texts, go on the ski trip, and focus on the fact that I was an independent person with my own goals in life. I refused to be dragged back into their world of expectations and guilt. However, it wasn't that easy. After returning home and getting back into my routine, I received a message from Jake, my older brother. Jake and I hadn't spoken in months, maybe even longer. I always thought that Jake could understand me better than my other siblings since he wasn't as ill as they were. However, he was constantly too preoccupied with his own affairs. I was taken aback when I saw his name pop up on my phone. His message was straightforward, "Hey, we need to talk." I wasn't feeling particularly dramatic about my family, but I wasn't sure what he wanted. I replied to the text, asking him to give me a call. A short while later, I contemplated ignoring it, but my curiosity got the better of me. He jumped right into it as soon as I picked up the phone. Before I could even say hi, he said, "Mom and Dad have discussed designating you as one of the boys' legal guardians when they are away." I nearly dropped the phone. For a few seconds, I just sat there in shock, my heart pounding. Was this some kind of prank? Were they really going to throw this responsibility on me after all these years of hardly being involved in my life? I managed to ask, "What the hell are you talking about?" Jake sighed, as if I was the one being irrational. "You know how things are with Mom and Dad. They've got a lot on their plate with the other boys, and they're not going to be around forever. They need to know someone's going to step up and take care of things when they're gone." I could feel the heat rising in my body. Jake didn't seem to understand why I was outraged. They thought that someone was me after everything? After all the ignoring and guilt-tripping, they just assumed I would drop everything and take over their mess? Look, I know it's a lot, but you're the only one who's really stable. The rest of us have our own issues. It nearly made me chuckle. Yeah, well, maybe you guys should have thought about that before now. I didn't even know this was a thing. They never told me they were going to talk to you about it. I figured you should know before they tried to spring it on you, he said. I was enraged. It was no longer just about Thanksgiving or Christmas, this was bigger. They hadn't even considered talking to me until now, when it was convenient for them. They were planning something long-term and wanted me to take over as the responsible party after we hadn't communicated for years. Simply put, no. Trying to make sense of it, I said, "So they've been discussing this behind my back? Like they just decided I'd take on the responsibility without even asking me?" "Yeah, pretty much," Jake replied. "They've been planning for a while." Sitting quietly, I stared at the wall, trying to take it all in. Although I knew it wasn't really Jake's fault, I still felt like screaming at him. He was only the messenger. However, that didn't change the reality that my parents were about to give me the needed me and how they were unsure of what they would do without my assistance. But the last part was what truly annoyed me. "Olivia, we're not asking for much," my mother wrote. "All we need to know is that someone will take care of the family while we are away." That's when I understood the true significance of this. They showed no concern for me, all that mattered to them was that their mess be cleaned up after they left. They didn't want me back in their life because they loved or missed me, they wanted me because I was the only one who hadn't broken. They wanted me because I was practical. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash. I was finished. I thought I had reached my breaking point after receiving that letter from my mother. What more was there for them to show me that I hadn't already seen? I had had enough of their manipulations, guilt trips, and attempts to hold me accountable for their disaster. Naturally, though, I was mistaken. It wasn't finished, not even close. A week or two after I threw away the letter, I received another call, this time from an unfamiliar number. Something in me was intrigued, but I nearly didn't pick up, having been ignoring their calls. It could have been Jake again or one of my parents trying a different approach. In any case, I picked up. "Hi, Olivia, this is Sarah," one of my sisters said. Sarah and I never had a close relationship. She had to deal with hospitals, therapists, and everything else on her own. Yes, I felt sorry for her as a child, but I didn't know her well. It felt unusual to hear from her now after everything, since we were essentially strangers sharing a house. Hey," I said, unsure of the direction this was taking. "Look," she began, "I know that things between you and your parents have been a little difficult, but I really need you to pay attention to what I have to say." Already, I could feel my stomach dropping. I thought, more guilt, more attempts to pull me back in. Here we go. "What is it?" I tried to seem neutral as I inquired, but I was already preparing myself for whatever nonsense was about to happen. "They're not doing well," she stated after taking a long breath. I mean, not doing well at all. The fact that no one is stepping forward to help with the boys is making them panic as Dad's health rapidly deteriorates. "Olivia, they are afraid. They're unsure of what to do." I remained silent for a while. I did care, it wasn't that I didn't. I didn't want my parents or anyone else to suffer. However, I couldn't just swoop in and make things right for them after everything. After years of them not caring about me, their band-aid was not me. With caution, I added, "I'm sorry to hear that, but I can't just drop everything. I, too, have a life." Sarah sighed, and I could tell she was frustrated. "I understand that, but the only one who can assist is you. You know what's happening with me and the others, and Jake is barely able to hold himself together." "Olivia, there isn't anyone else," I retorted, feeling my rage rising once more. Desperate because they ignored this for years, they believed that everything would simply go away. So they allowed things to accumulate, and now I'm responsible because I'm the one who got out and made a living for myself? "Sarah, that is unfair." "I know it's unfair," she said. "But this is where we are. They require assistance." There it was once more, the same old shame, the same old story. They always managed to pull me back, regardless of what I did or how far I tried to get away from it. I could sense the tension rising within me, the animosity and frustration that had been building for years now reaching a head. I spoke more sharply than I meant to when I said, "I'm not doing it. It is not my responsibility to tidy up their mess. They didn't give a damn about me when I was a child, and they certainly don't get to visit me now only for the sake of convenience. I have a life of my own. They must solve this problem on their own." When Sarah spoke once more, I could hear the pain in her voice. "I understand, Olivia, I do. However, this isn't about me or you." Her words struck me hard. It's about the family. It's about what's going to happen to the boys when they're gone. If we don't step up, who will? That struck me hard because it made me understand how imprisoned we all were, not because I felt suddenly guilty after neglecting and ignoring me for years. My parents were suddenly attempting to exploit. "Listen, your dad is getting worse. We don't know how long he has left, and he keeps going in and out of the hospital," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Olivia, I'm at a loss for what to do." The card she had been waiting to play was finally on the table, the card that said, "Your father is dying." Although she didn't state it directly, I could tell she was implying it. I'm not cold-hearted, I didn't want my father to be in pain. However, I couldn't just abandon everything and run to their side after everything they had done to me. "I'm sorry," I murmured, attempting to sound calm, "but this isn't my problem. You and Dad have had years to figure this out. You can't just show up now and expect me to fix everything. She looked at me as if I had slapped her. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I just need you to be there for the family. For the family? I echoed, nearly giggling. What family? The one that ignored me for 25 years? The one that only talks to me when they need something? That's not a family, Mom, that's just manipulation. Her eyes grew wide, and I briefly believed she was going to disagree with me. Instead, she simply broke down in tears right outside my door. I had no idea what to do when she started crying. I couldn't stand by and watch her cry, but I also couldn't invite her inside. Look, I continued, now speaking more softly, I get that this is hard for you. I really do, but I'm not your backup plan. I'm not the person who's going to come in and make everything okay. You made your choices, and now you have to deal with them. She looked up at me after wiping her eyes, and I could see the despair beginning to give way to rage. We did the best we could, Olivia. You don't understand what it was like raising all of you, dealing with everything. We didn't have time for you because we were trying to keep everyone else alive. The excuse was there, I had heard the same justification countless times before. And that's not my fault, I stated in a firmer tone. You made the choice to have 5 kids. You made the choice to focus on everyone else and leave me behind. That was your decision, not mine. And now you're trying to make me feel guilty for it? I won't do it, Mom. I won't. She stared at me for a long time without saying anything, as if she had forgotten who I was. Perhaps she didn't remember, because I wasn't causing any issues. She still thought of me as the little child she could ignore. However, I was no longer that child. I had had enough of being invisible. At last, she said something. So that's it? You're just going to turn your back on us? I shook my head. No, you turned your back on me a long time ago. I'm just finally walking away. Regarding that, she had nothing to say. She simply turned and left, making her way back to her vehicle. I experienced a peculiar spectrum of feelings as I watched her leave. There was a sad part of me, to be sure, but the majority of me felt liberated, as if I had finally let go of something I had been holding on to for years, something I should have done long ago. I went back inside after she left and sat down to attempt to take in what had just transpired. I had lost my anger, I wasn't even hurt. I had just finished. I was over the manipulation, the guilt, and the never-ending sense that I wasn't good enough. They weren't going to rely on me. I wasn't going to be the last thing they tried. I wasn't going to let them bring me down any longer. I had my own life to live. It was quiet for the following few weeks. I received no correspondence, no calls, and nothing else. To be honest, I hadn't felt this good in a long time. I concentrated on my life, my friends, and my job. I wasn't watching over my shoulder to see when they would send me another message. I had moved past the shadow of their expectations. Then, perhaps a month later, I received an email from Jake, not my parents. It was brief, just a few sentences, but it conveyed all the information I required. Dad died last night. I thought you ought to be aware. I looked at the email for a while, unsure of how to react. I knew this would happen, so I wasn't shocked. However, I also didn't feel depressed. To be honest, I didn't feel anything. I considered answering.